Welcome. This video is predicting that there will be a black swan, unexpected shock event in the stock market on February 25th, 2026. The date that this video is posted on the social media platform that you are watching it on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. As does this time-stamped email. As we can see here, this email was composed on February 18th. And as does this forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Okay, so a black swan event is an expected shock, something that is shocking, an event that is unexpected by most people, not all people. This term, black swan event, is often associated with a financial event, but not always. So there were, for example, stock market declines. The best example probably of a black swan event in the financial market that occurred in one day would be Black Monday in 1987. When the Dow lost its record amount in terms of percent in one day, which was almost 23%. The Dow lost on that one day. It was a black swan event. All right, welcome. This is part 2 of this video that is talking about the prophetic signs that occurred on February 17th, 2026. That confirms the prediction for the black swan event in the financial markets on February 25th. And so, if you haven't watched part 1, you need to do that first. So, I recommend pausing this video here, going back to part 1. Part 1 is the figure skater video. The thumbnail for part 1 is the U.S. figure skater. The black swan figure skater, the heavily favored U.S. Olympian who crashed in an elegant all-black outfit, but it was a black swan event not only because of that, and because figure skating is like ballet and therefore the tie to the movie Black Swan, but also his crash was completely unexpected and it was shocking, which makes it a true black swan event. He was heavily favored. He had dominated the figure skating world for the last number of years. He was a 4-time U.S. champion, for example, yet he crashed on his last skate when he was well ahead of his next competitor even. It was a shock. It was an unexpected black swan event. All right? And so that's part 1. Go back and watch. That's just the thumbnail, though. The video isn't about that. It's about many things, like every video, but I have to put a thumbnail and title to these videos. And so there's a big part of it is about that, but it's about much more. So go back and watch that video first, come back. This is part 2. Okay, so we're going to talk about some truly profound things here that happened on February 17th that confirm all of this analysis, that prove that this prediction is from God. Because like I said at the beginning of part 1, it is one thing to predict a crash. Some people are predicting that. It is another thing to predict the beginning of the biggest crash in history. Very, very few people are talking about that or predicting that, but there are some. And it's quite another thing to predict that the beginning of this biggest crash in history will precisely occur on February 25th, when there will be a black swan event, the big initial shock stock market loss, okay? February 25th. This video is being recorded, by the way, on February 21st. So I don't know what's going to happen in the stock market on Monday and Tuesday. I imagine not much. There might be a big decline. There may be some talk about potentially a recession or a crash on Monday or Tuesday, although I don't think so. But either way, I'm still predicting that on Wednesday, the 25th, will be the Black Swan event. And anyway, if there does end up being such talk on the Monday or Tuesday, I'm making this video prior to that, just to be clear. Okay. So there is this avalanche. This is amazing. Wait till you hear this. So again, God pointed to February 17th in advance. Overwhelmingly, it was recognized many days prior for profound reasons that God was pointing to February 17th. And one of the reasons is that the flood in the account in Genesis began on the 17th day of the second month. 8 people were rescued in the ark. February 17th was exactly 8 years after February 17th in the year ending in 8, which was the day that the Weather Channel officially named Winter Storm Noah, as in Noah's flood. Prior to February 17th, 2018, I predicted that the Weather Channel would name Winter Storm Noah on that date. It was a long time in advance before February 17th, because they give the list of the names that they will use in that season at the beginning of the season. And so when the name Noah was recognized to be in the list, then it was recognized that February 17th would be the date that Winter Storm Noah would begin or be officially named, and that is exactly what happened. It was, I think, the first real prediction made on this video channel. But of course, the original channel has since been cancel cultured for speaking too much truth in 2020 or 21. Okay, so let's begin here. And again, the reasons for how February 25th is known ahead of time are what prove that this prediction is from God. You will see. It is clear. It is first of all, predicting that a Black Swan event will occur on February 25th, and me telling you at the same time that the reason why I know is that it is a prediction from God, is enough proof for the reasonable person. But most people, well, I should say human beings are not rational beings. They're not created to be rational, and God created them. Why did he do that? Well, I discussed that in part 1 of this video. But that said, once these reasons are explained to you, which will be, as you will see, clearly from God, to conclude that this prediction is anything other than from God is to make you a complete, utter fool. I want to be very clear. You are a fool after hearing these predictions and this prediction coming to pass. Sorry, after hearing these reasons for this prediction and then this prediction coming to pass. And you will suffer the consequences because, well, let's be honest, let's be real here. There's a reason why I am trying to change your worldview. And you know the reason. So let's begin. I'm trying to help you, of course. Now, the avalanche was in Nevada. Nevada is the silver state. The avalanche occurred in Nevada County next to Nevada. What's interesting here, by the way, it's not on the February, it didn't occur on the 17th, but Robert Duvall died on the 16th, or rather the news of his death was reported on the 16th. And he did star in the movie The Godfather, of course. And The Godfather has an iconic scene in which a horse head is placed in the bed of someone to give them a warning. And all of this is a warning, these signs that I'm speaking about. And there was a horse named Silver in the Lone Ranger show, which was a prophetic sign on January 1st. Because Trump and Melania entered the gala for the New Year's party, Melania dressed in an all-silver shimmering dress, and they entered the ballroom to the music of the Lone Ranger. And the media and Trump has referred to himself as the Lone Ranger in the past, and he's been associated with the Lone Ranger on numerous occasions in his presidencies. And anyway, he's the 47th president, and 47 days after the Lone Ranger Silver Horse sign was February 17th, which was the day of the new moon and the beginning of the year of the horse in Chinese astrology. And then we had this avalanche in Nevada County next to Nevada, the Silver State, 47 days after the Silver Horse sign. Okay, you get the idea. There's actually lots more to that. The big thing about the gala was the auction of a painting that was painted in 15 minutes by a speed painter, a giant picture of Jesus' face, which was auctioned by Trump. He played the auctioneer. At the end of the auction, Trump repeated, "Do I hear 3 million? 3 million. Do I hear 3 million? Sold." It sold for less than 3 million, almost 3 million, but he repeated 3 million, which hinted at the 30 pieces of silver that Jesus was sold for. That's why the Silver Horse connection with Melania in a silver dress and Trump and them and her entering to the music of the Lone Ranger. There's lots more to it, okay? But 47 days later, this was a celebration. No, sorry. But anyway, he was the 47th president, and 47 days later is the year of the horse, and this Silver State sign. Okay. So the avalanche was in Donner Pass, Lake Tahoe, California. This occurred on February 17th. The sheriff's name is Moon. It occurred on the new moon, the beginning of the year of the horse, which makes this confirmation of the prophetic significance of the beginning of the year of the horse, which ties us back to the Silver Horse sign on the 1st, 47 days earlier, the 30 pieces of silver. Furthermore, the moon is symbolic of Jesus, who was sold for 30 pieces of silver. The moon is a giant rock. Rock in the Bible is symbolism for Jesus. The sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. And watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is important, and it is symbolic of watching for the timing of the Lord's return, which includes the watching of moon signs. Which, by the way, is why Trump was born on the day of a prophetic blood moon lunar eclipse. Exactly 700 days before Israel was reborn. And Trump was inaugurated in the year ending in 7 at the age of 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. Now, there were 8 deaths. On this day, there were 8 deaths, okay, in the avalanche. 8 reported deaths. The 17th, the day of the 8 reported deaths, plus 8 days gets us to February 25th. You see where this is going already. It is an avalanche. It fell from a high place, like a stock market reaching a peak high and then falling like an avalanche. Now, this is the date 217 hints at 9/11. That's because on 9/11, 2 planes struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart. And that's because the 2 space shuttle disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. They are commemorated on the same day every year because of this. The 2 space shuttle disasters pointed to Apollo 17. I should say the 2 space shuttle disasters, exactly 17 years apart, pointed to Apollo 17, the last time that an American was on the moon. The last American's departure from the moon is symbolic of America's departure from Christ. Speaking of moon signs. Incidentally, the word Jesus in the Greek concordance is 2424, G2424. Exactly 24 plus 24 years after the last American was on the moon was the day that the first American last American, first American, 24 plus 24 years exactly later, took the VACCINE, which is the mark of the Antichrist. 24 plus 24 years is also exactly 576 months, and the 576th word in the concordance is to step off, to disembark, as in to step off and disembark the moon. Stunning. The word Trump is equal to 88 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. In archaic English, the word Trump is a trumpet, or the sounding of a trumpet. So this 8 deaths in 8 days also hints at that. The trumpeting of the beginning of the stock market collapse, as in the collapse of the snow on the mountain. Now, I did just mention a second ago what the mark of the Antichrist is. I want to get something out of the way here. The reason for this prediction that is from God is a reason that I know far more than you. I know far more than you or anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. Make no mistake. I have the authority to tell you the purpose of this prediction. And it is not so that you can go, oh, cool, neat. You were able to know the date of the Black Swan event ahead of time. That is not the purpose of this prediction. The purpose of this prediction is not only to prove that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God. There is already a ton of evidence for that. The purpose of this prediction that is from God, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction, is to prove the controversial things that I am saying in this video and on this video channel. There is no debate. Zero. Case closed. No discussion at all. It is the mark of the Antichrist. It was the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or false form of religious worship. In fact, for those who are wise, it did come with a false form of religious worship, and it does not need a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is it is in fact judgment for this particular doctrine that in the book of Revelation, Jesus calls Nicolaitan and says he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. Now, am I going to explain that anymore? No, I'm not. Am I going to tell you how your commonly held objections for how it isn't the mark of the Antichrist is incorrect? No, I'm not going to elaborate anymore. If you want to understand, if you want to learn about how the commonly held objections are not correct, watch the snakebite video on this channel. And if you'd like to learn how the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is what I have just described and much more, dispensationalism, free grace, cheap grace, sovereign grace, Reformed theology, Calvinism, all of that, then if you are a Christian, you need to watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. And I'll leave it at that. But there is no discussion about these things because when its prediction comes to pass, it'll prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections overwhelmingly is proving these things. And the big picture of signs will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. And that's the purpose of this prediction. Okay. Now, the Blackbird Mountain Guides, this is the outfit, the company leading this ski tour expedition in which there were 8 deaths, said that a total of 11 clients and 4 guides had been staying in a remote hut or remote huts below the 9,110 foot level of Castle Peak, and were, quote, in the process of returning to the trailhead when the avalanche struck. So I've quoted this from the article, and there's a quote of the, I guess, company. This is amazing because here we get 9/11, which obviously hints at 9/11 in 2001, the warning of God's judgment. And God pointed to the two pillars of America's security through the events of 9/11, its economic power and its military power, which is sourced in its economic power. That's because Ground Zero with the World Trade Centers right next to Wall Street pointed to America's financial system, which through this sign of the avalanche, as I'm explaining, is now about to collapse. And the other plane, of course, hit the Pentagon, the symbol for America's military power. Anyway, we have in this story 9/11. Again, the date of this avalanche hints at 9/11 because the two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart. And the flood judgment began on the 17th day of the second month. The seventh, and that's in Genesis 7, building number 7 was the last to collapse of the three towers that collapsed, and it had 47 floors. And that's because in the flood account, there was a 7 days followed by a 40 days timeline in Genesis 7, hence building 7. Okay. Now, the Blackbird Mountain Guides confirms we are expecting a black swan event 8 days later after the 8 deaths in the Black Mountain Guides expedition. Now, the mountain. Okay, this avalanche on the mountain was the same day as the car crash pileup in the Rocky Mountain State, which I explained in part 1. There were a total of 9 dead or missing, because there were 8 reported deaths but 1 missing, for a total of 9. And there were 11 clients, which gives us another 9/11. And again, the date that this occurred itself hints at 9/11. A total of 9 dead or missing, 11 clients, 9/11. They, quote, had been staying in remote huts below the 9,110 foot Castle Peak. Staying in huts at Castle Peak and white snow hints at staying at the White House. Okay, because they were engulfed by white snow. The whole scenery is completely white. In fact, the whole area had undergone many feet of snowfall, or not many feet, but a multiple feet of snowfall in a massive snowstorm, which is what led to the avalanche. Okay, so it's a black swan event, but it's also white snow, and this is hinting at the White House. It's all cleverly designed by God here. Now, I want to elaborate on something here, and I'm going to play a clip that I haven't put it into a video for a long time that needs to be put in here. Because this 9,110 foot level is one of these pairings of the numbers 9 and 110 in God's signs that he does to confirm the signs and connections. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 11. And I know these are the numbers because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections for more than 8 years, from morning until night, for more than full-time hours. Okay, so let me just play this clip explaining the profound reason why God pairs 9 and 110 together. It isn't only to hint at 9/11. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110 and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the two towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of two towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God, Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. All right, welcome back. Now, it took 6 hours to reach 6 of the skiers in the 36th state. Actually, it wasn't in the 36th state. It was in Nevada County, next to Nevada, which is the 36th state. And so, for the purposes of symbolism, it might as well have been in the 36th state, which is why there were 6 skiers rescued after 6 hours. Okay? Because 36 hints at 3 sixes. But it is also 6 times 6, and also 6 times 6, and also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And also the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. Now, it took 6 hours to reach 6 of the skiers in the county with the same name as the 36th state. 2 were taken to the hospital, which hints at 2 antichrists. Also, 2 people living in the White House, President Michelle and Vice President Barack. This is the prediction. The first time that the VP will live in the White House, yes. And God uses firsts for signs. It'll be okay. This incident involving survival in the wilderness in snowy force of nature in wintry conditions and a rescue that involved a sheriff named Moon occurred on the same day as the solar eclipse involving the moon over snowy white Antarctica that pointed to the survival and rescue of those on Shackleton's Endurance ship that sank when it was crushed by ice. By the way, the whole ice thing hints at the coming perseverance and endurance of the saints required when the tables are flipped, and instead of coming after the illegal invaders, the Democrats and Obama will come after true conservatives and Christians and round them up and put them into internment camps. That's what's coming. We saw the early stages of a genocide in the 4 years of the Biden administration. There, you can look it up online, the 10 stages of a genocide. We are past the midpoint in the wokeism culture due to the great feminization of America and the West. If you don't know what I'm referring to by the great feminization, you should look that up. Written by a woman, by the way. The great feminization. Now, I don't want to get off too much track here because I could go on about that. Obviously, you couldn't tell. So, anyway, ice in God's signs is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. God has demonstrated this. It has to do with pointing to Kurt Vonnegut and his novel Cat's Cradle, in which there is this substance ice-9 that is ingested, etc. So, we just know this, that ice is hinting at the mark of the Antichrist. And those who will be rounded up are those who will refuse to take the VACCINE in the next so-called pandemic. Okay? That's what's up. That's what's up. And the rationed food will be restricted to only the good citizens, those who take the mark of the Antichrist, as described in Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation. Okay, so that's why the Endurance ship was crushed by ice. This is the biggest example of survival and rescue in history. All right, and that's why the eclipse occurred over Antarctica that pointed to it, but that's further explained in another video. It's amazing how this eclipse on February 17th pointed to Shackleton's Endurance ship. But anyway, on this same day of the eclipse over the snowy Antarctica, we have the prophetic sign in America involving the wintry conditions and a rescue. In other words, it's completely relevant, this connection here. This is an amazing thing. You need, in other words, you need to watch the Shackleton Endurance video that I think still needs to be posted. So look for that video. And because through this parallel, through this connection, God has brought the Shackleton Endurance ship to be a sign for America because of the rescue in the wintry conditions involving the snow in the avalanche. Same sort of thing. The avalanche crushed the people, right? As did the ice and snow in Antarctica. Okay. Now, the avalanche incident occurred in Donner Pass. Here we go. Which is 2,160 meters above Truckee Lake. There were 4 guides leading the group. This occurred on the 4th anniversary of the prophetic climax of the trucker freedom protest on February 17th, 2022, which is what is hinted at with Truckee Lake, the trucker protest. And the protest in February of 2022 in Ottawa and the whole way across the continent was in wintry conditions. It was quite bitterly cold at that time, if you will recall. The truckers were the guides for the movement. I mean, literally. They were the leaders, the guides for the movement. All sorts of things happened because of the truckers. The truckers were the leaders, the guides of the movement, which hints at the guides that were leading this expedition above Truckee Lake. But it was a prophetic 2,160 meters above Truckee Lake, Donner Pass. That gives us 6 times 6 times 60, which hints at the number of the Antichrist. Also, Barack Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year. And his name Barack is equal to 216 in English gematria. The 44th president wore number 23 in high school basketball, which is why the trucker protest was about the Emergencies Act passed in the 44th Parliament by the 23rd Prime Minister. Okay? On February 17th, 2022, a group of Christians marched in a line through wintry conditions around Parliament in Ottawa for the 7th day in a row, and then they blew the shofar trumpet. This followed the line of truckers who traversed the nation parallel to the 7 times 7th latitudinal line border wall of security while blowing their truck horns. The Israelites marched in a line around the walls of security of Jericho for 7 days in a row, followed by 7 times around the walls of security while 7 trumpets were blown before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. Did you get that? That's an amazing thing, right? This is the whole thing about the trucker protest. The 7 times 7th latitudinal line with the truck horns. And then this march by Christians for 7 days in a row with the trumpet, the shofar trumpet, just like the book of Joshua. When the Israelites enacted a 3 sets of 7 and trumpets in a march around walls of security, the border between America and the U.S., Canada and the U.S. is symbolic of the border wall of security. It is a border wall of security, but it's the 7 times 7th latitudinal line designed by God to hint at this 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted. That's right. In other words, from the beginning of these 2 nations, God had this plan all along for the trucker protest. Do you understand? Do you understand the times that you are living in and how this has all been set up for now? The reason why the continent was divided was for this prophetic sign that I'm explaining. And it's not being explained anywhere else, and it's not about me, of course. This is what it's all about here. This was a Joshua sign, a book of Joshua sign, the trucker protest. And now God is following up exactly 4 years later. And what I didn't realize at the time of composing this paragraph here is that this avalanche was the 4th deadliest in U.S. history. Exactly 4 years, and it was above Truckee Lake, exactly 4 years after the trucker protest in wintry conditions. You know what? Furthermore, Donner Pass today is a truck artery. Trucks flow through there on the I-80. Speaking of the number 8 and 8 days after this, the I-80 is part of this too. I don't know if I remembered to put that in later into this writings either. I don't think I did actually, but come to think of it. The truckers flow through the I-80, and it's 4 years after the trucker protest. It's the 4th deadliest in U.S. history, the avalanche, but that confirms the addition of the 8 days from the I-80 sign here because of the Donner Pass. Oh, a part of this sign is how the I-80 was shut down for multiple days during this storm. The Donner Pass, I should say. The Donner Pass I-80 was shut down. Just like the truckers shut down the trade arteries, or rather the streets, which was symbolic of the clogged arteries of a person who takes the shot. They clogged the streets, the arteries of Ottawa, and they, of course, drove along the trade artery along the border wall of security. And that's why the border wall of security between America and Canada is so long. They had this long convoy of trucks, which was completely symbolic of the convoy of Israelites marching around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. Also, the blocking of the bridges was also symbolic. Oh, and you know what? Interesting. Oh, wow. Wow, I didn't expect this. So whenever I go into the information, something comes up because I just go into it deeply here. Well, anyway, the main trade arteries between America and Canada were shut down, which was also symbolic of the clogged arteries people get from taking the thing. Now, we're talking about a 4-year anniversary to the 4th deadliest avalanche and 4 guides. And there were other 4s on this day, including the 4 deaths in the car pileup on the same day in the Rocky Mountain state, and also, and on. Okay, let's just leave it at that. Well, the number 4, or rather the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is a symbol for a door, which in God's signs is the same symbol as a bridge, because this bridge or door will be opened or crossed over from the demonic realm in the bottomless pit, as it's described in the book of Revelation. Okay, and that's why the bridge symbolism here, and the 4 connection. Wow. Because ultimately, the border wall of security between Canada and the U.S., or Mexico and the U.S., is symbolism for not only the book of Joshua, but it's also symbolism for the border wall of security between the demonic realm and the earthly realm, which is described as being opened, and there will be this clash between the demonic realm and the earthly realm, a collision in the end times. And that's what's coming. And that's what's being communicated with the closure of the bridges. I now get it. It required, though, this, because it's the 44th Parliament, furthermore, that's a 4 right there, and you had the bridges. And the 44th Parliament acted because of the bridges being closed. I should have realized this before, but it's because the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door, which is the same as a bridge. Because it's the door that's open to the bottomless pit, and the demons cross over the bridge in the book of Revelation. A portal, if you will. Wow. Yeah, so now we have, anyway, also, in addition to this, the 4 years connection to the 4th deadliest avalanche, and then also the 4 deaths in the car pileup, and also the 4 guides in the avalanche. And the truckers were the guides. And this occurred above Truckee Lake, or right at Truckee Lake. And the I-80 is, of course, 40 plus 40, but 8 days is also 4 plus 4 days. And we're talking about the 44th Parliament and also the 44th President Antichrist. Yeah. The 4 guides who were trapped in the avalanche at Donner Pass above Truckee Lake on February 17th, 2026, hints at the Miwok guides who were murdered and eaten when the Donner Party became trapped in the wintry conditions. So these people in the avalanche, the skiers with the 4 guides, got trapped in Donner Pass in the wintry conditions. A storm moved in. Just like when the Donner Party was traversing over this pass, a storm moved in and they got trapped. And then ultimately ate the Mohawk guides after murdering them. And again, there were guides in the skiing expedition. Now, there were 4 of them. The Miwok guides were murdered and eaten by the starving members of the Donner Party. The Miwok are members of 4 linguistically related Native American groups, indigenous groups, to what is now Northern California, extending to Central California. In other words, this Miwok people are known for actually being 4 subculture people, speaking 4 linguistically related languages. So when you refer to the Miwok, there's actually 4 types of Miwok. And they were the guides of the Donner Party, and they were murdered and eaten. And there were 4 guides in the avalanche that was the 4th deadliest in U.S. history, exactly 4 years after the 44th Parliament enacted or tabled the Emergencies Act. During the protest of truckers at the bridge, which hints at the number 4. This is why the trucker protest, which is why the connection to the Truckee Lake closure and Donner Pass closure 4 years later, in the heart of Miwok country, known for the 4 linguistically related Native American groups. They traditionally spoke one of the Miwok languages in the Utian family. The word Miwok means people of the Miwok languages. Anthropologists commonly divide the Miwok into 4 geographically and culturally diverse ethnic groups, subgroups. Not groups, subgroups. It's 4 groups. These distinctions were not used among the Miwok before European contact. So the Miwok considered them all together as one, but there were actually 4 distinct groups that were recognized after the Europeans came. The prophetic implication is that the vaccine the truckers were protesting will be enforced through rationed food to only those who take the VACCINE. The coming food shortage will be related to the coming stock market crash avalanche that is predicted to begin with a black swan event on February 25th, 8 days after 8 deaths in the Donner Pass avalanche and closure of the I-80. Do you get it? Not only is God pointing to the endurance and the Shackletonship experience, but he's pointing to the endurance of the Donner Party. But through it, he's pointing to starvation. Starvation so bad that they resorted to cannibalism and murdered the other tribe. What that hints at is the coming genocide and murder of the arch enemies of the blue team in the current civil war. It's a politicide that's coming. Part of that politicide will involve, like I explained, internment camps, but also restricting the buying and selling of food to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. The food that will be rationed, which is the reason for this Donner Pass sign here, because they starved. Yes. This isn't the first instance God has provided a prophetic sign for Donner Pass. I forget the other example. I should look it up because even the date counts between these 2 signs may connect. I just found this in an older thread from August of 2024. The Donner Party movie, there was a movie, The Donner Party, and it was released the 23rd triangular number of days after Obama was inaugurated, and Obama was the basketball president who wore number 23 in high school basketball. Okay, so that's amazing. That's astounding confirmation. The beginning of the Antichrist's first presidency, the president who will preside over the starvation and rationing of food, was inaugurated the 23rd triangular number of days, 276 days. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 23rd row is 276, after the inauguration of the president who wore number 23. Okay, that's amazing. Now, which, by the way, is hinted at here too with the 4 guides in the 4th deadliest avalanche in history at Donner Pass. The 44th president presiding over the coming rationing of food and starvation, which is what Donner Pass hints at because of the Donner Party. All right. And the 4 Miwok guides, or rather 4 subgroups of the Miwok, and the Miwok guides were murdered and eaten. Okay. So the prophetic implication is that the VACCINE the truckers were protesting will be enforced through rationed food to only those who take the VACCINE. The coming food shortage will be related to the coming stock market crash avalanche that is predicted to begin with a Black Swan event on February 25th, 8 days after the 8 deaths in the Donner Pass avalanche. The climax of the trucker protest prophetic sign in the 44th Parliament on February 17th, 2022 was 129 days before the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup on June 26th, 2022. 129 days because G129 in the Greek concordance is the word for blood. And it was the blood that was affected by taking the VACCINE that was being protested by the truckers during the 44th Parliament. The climax on February 17th of this prophetic sign was when the Emergencies Act was tabled on February 17th. Okay, now, the day that the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup, the Colorado Avalanche, was exactly 444 plus 444 plus 444 days before the 4 guides were trapped in the 4th deadliest avalanche at Truckee Lake, and the day of the 4 people that died in the car pileup in Colorado. Exactly 4 years after the climax of the trucker protest prophetic sign in the 44th Parliament. The Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup 444 plus 444 plus 444 days before the 4 guides were trapped in the 4th deadliest avalanche on the same day that 4 people died in the car pileup in Colorado, the 4 corners state that has 4 corners, exactly 4 years after the climax of the Truckee, as in Truckee Lake, protest prophetic sign in the 44th Parliament. Can God make it any clearer? That the 44th president is the Antichrist. But by the way, I don't need to make it any clearer, and God doesn't either, because when this prediction comes to pass, like I said, it proves all of the controversial things that I am saying. And so, if you are an evangelical Christian that loves to play the Antichrist guessing game, it's time for you to stop playing the Antichrist guessing game. You are not correct about your interpretation of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It is not the Holy Spirit that is holding back the Antichrist. I've explained it too many other times. Case closed, though, no debate. If you want to continue wasting your time playing the Antichrist guessing game, go ahead. But that's a sin, because you're wasting your time, and I'm telling you that's the case. God has identified the Antichrist here. He has been doing so for many years. The supposed no one can know until the day is completely false. It's from Satan. The first of the 2 Antichrists, a pope, was clearly identified in Old Testament prophecy. Okay, enough of that. Now, but believe me, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction, and it is so that you know it's time to stop playing the Antichrist guessing game. Now, the MVP of the Avalanche Stanley Cup was number 8. On February 17th, 8 people died in the avalanche, and this is 8 days before the predicted avalanche in the stock market. The Stanley Cup win in 2022 was the first for the Avalanche in 7 plus 7 plus 7 years, a 3 sets of 7, as in walls of security collapsing, as in an avalanche. The Avalanche won the, did you get that? Not only is it, just any old team that won for the first time in 7 plus 7 plus 7 years, but it's the avalanche. An avalanche is symbolism of a collapse. It's the snow collapsing off the mountain. The 3 sets of 7 in the Bible come in the context of the collapse of the walls of security of Jericho. That's why the avalanche won for the first time in 7 plus 7 plus 7 years, because the Israelites enacted the 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security collapsed. The Avalanche won the 2022 Cup against Tampa Bay. Okay, 22. The year 22. TB gives us 20 and 2, the 20th and second letter of the alphabet, which hints at 22, which is in God's signs the number that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. The inverse of the mark of the Antichrist would have been the Tav mark in the book of Ezekiel, and the Tav is the last and 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible out of a total of 22 chapters. And the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes, which come in pairs, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2. Tampa Bay, as in 22, was the first, which is, by the way, why the COVID Super Bowl was played in Tampa Bay, and why Tom Brady was also the quarterback that won that Super Bowl, was the first to play. The Tampa Bay, the Lightning hockey team, was the first to play in 3 consecutive Stanley Cups in 37 years. That's another 3 sets of 7. So both teams gives us the 3 sets of 7 in their history. 37 years, 7 plus 7 plus 7 years. In 2022, Tampa became the 3rd team to win 11 consecutive playoff games. That hints at 311, which is Coronavirus Day in 2020. God pairs 2 1s and a 3 together in his signs to hint at G131, which is in the Greek concordance the word for blood disease, which is what a person gets after taking the mark of the Antichrist. 129 days, as in G129, blood, after the climax of the trucker protest over the thing that gives people blood disease. The commissioner of the NHL did not present the Stanley Cup because he tested positive for COVID. It was the first time that had happened with this particular commissioner. The 4 guides were leading a 3-day trek. By the way, I say that, just because that's the news. I don't believe he was actually tested positive for COVID, right? The 4 guides, and I'm not saying that there was no such thing as COVID, but the tests were certainly not anything true. It was all propaganda and hysteria. The 4 guides were leading, it was a witch hunt, in other words. The 4 guides were leading, like the classic type of witch hunt, in which the witches are always the people that are those that are saying there are no witches, which is what exactly what happened during COVID. The 4 guides were leading a 3-day trek. The avalanche was the same day as 4 deaths in a 30-car pileup in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners. Okay, so in other words, there's a parallel here between these 2 events on the same day. Again, we have the Colorado Avalanche hockey team, right? And then on February 17th, we have the Avalanche and the car pileup in Colorado. But in the avalanche, there were 4 guides, and they were leading a 3-day trek. And in the car pileup in Colorado, there were 4 deaths in a 30-car pileup. The avalanche and car pileup in Colorado was 3 times 444 days after the avalanche won the Stanley Cup. It was the 3rd Stanley Cup win for the team from the Four Corners state that has 4 corners. And they beat the Lightning, who played in their 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup. There will be a 3rd term for the 44th president. That's what all of this hints at. And by the way, this president held his Democrat acceptance speech for the nomination in Colorado. Oh, you know what? Wow. More just comes to me. So the name Barack Obama means lightning from heaven in Hebrew. And in the book of Luke, Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. Barack Obama means lightning from heaven in Hebrew. Lightning is Barack, okay? And we have the Tampa Bay Lightning playing Colorado in this Stanley Cup, okay? Bama is the word in Hebrew for high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. For example, it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place. Furthermore, the high place is a euphemism in the Bible for the false religious worship that the Jews would conduct on the tops of mountains. Colorado is the mountain state. Denver is the highest city in America, which is why Obama chose to have the convention speech there. It was Antichrist. Oh, in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic is from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. But we have this lightning from heaven equation in the Stanley Cup because of the Colorado avalanche. Oh, and furthermore, avalanche refers to snow falling from a high place, the mountain. Not only that, the tops of mountains, which is what the high places is a euphemism for in the Bible. Stunning. And then from that lightning from heaven, Barack Obama Stanley Cup, we have 444 plus 444 plus 444 days to the fourth deadliest avalanche and 4 guides and 4 deaths in the car pileup in Colorado, in the 4-corner state that has 4 corners, which further confirms that the Stanley Cup in 2022 was the Barack Obama Stanley Cup. Lightning from heaven. Yeah, wow. And as I'll explain, I'm sure, February 17th connects to the date that it is predicted Barack Obama will return to the White House for a 3rd term. Well, actually, he'll arrive first as the vice president, but come to think of it, it's believed that he will become the president on June 17th in 2029 when Michelle Obama is predicted to step down. And come to think of it, June 17th is 17th of the month. So let me just do the calculation in my head here. Well, wouldn't you know? It's exactly 40 months. That's right. And I knew this already, I think. I have this in an... Man, I sure hope I do. Maybe I don't. Huh. Wow, I don't think I do. So, well, on the 4th anniversary of the trucker protest, with the Donner Pass avalanche at Truckee Lake, with the 4 guides, on the same day as the 4 deaths, in the 4 corners state that has 4 corners, that was exactly 444 plus 444 plus 444 days after the Barack Obama Stanley Cup. We have exactly 40 months to the predicted return of the 44th president for a 3rd term. Hence the 30-car pileup and the 3-day trek and the 3rd Stanley Cup in a row for the Lightning. Wow. The MVP of that Stanley Cup was player number 8. 8 were reported dead in the avalanche on the day of the deaths of the 80s coach for Colorado and the 80s first black presidential candidate, a subject that I discussed in part 1 of this video. These are other signs that occurred on February 17th. This is again now in conjunction with this sign on the I-80, Donner Pass. So the I-80 sign here at Donner Pass, because the Donner Pass was shut down, the I-80, at the time of the avalanche, in which there were 8 deaths, was the same day as the death of the coach of the basketball team from Colorado, who was the 80s coach, and the day of the death of Jesse Jackson, the first black presidential candidate who ran twice in the 80s. Okay, now, anyway, the 44th president will serve a 3rd term after he returns to the White House. He'll return to the White House on January 20th as the vice president. And that day will be the 888th composite number of days, 1,068 days, after the 8 reported deaths in the avalanche near where the I-80 was shut down, on the same day as the deaths of the 80s coach from Colorado and the presidential candidate, the 80s presidential candidate. Okay, and again, this February 17th date is also 8 days to the predicted Black Swan event in the financial markets. And the death of Jesse Jackson was a Black Swan sign because Jesse Jackson's serious presidential run as a black candidate was a Black Swan event in American politics. Sudden and unexpected, a shock. Okay. Oh, and you know what? The return of Barack Obama to the White House. Wait a second. Obviously. This is all pointing to the big Black Swan event, which will be the return of the first black president, Barack Obama, to the White House. And again, this fourth deadliest, let's just go through it again. The fourth deadliest avalanche with 4 guides on the same day as the 4 deaths in the car pileup in Colorado in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners, exactly 444 plus 444 plus 444 after the Colorado Avalanche Stanley Cup, which was also, again, and also February 17th was 4 years exactly after the 44th Parliament sign when the bridges were closed, and bridges are number 4, as I explained. Well, February 17th was also 4 days after the Black Swan collapse crash of the skater, who was the 4-time U.S. champion, who goes by the nickname Quad God, as in quad being 4. So, yeah. And by the way, that Quad God skater finished in 8th place, which, as I said in part 1, is confirmation for adding the 8 days. Right? 4-time U.S. champion finished 8th place, 4 days and then 8 days later. Jesse Jackson, by the way, died at the age of 84. Another 8 and 4 there. And he ran for president in the year 84. And the name Barack Obama is equal to 84 in Hebrew gematria. And he was born on the date 8/4. Okay, so, well, anyway, we have the 888th composite number here from these 8s to January 20th, 2029, which confirms everything here. Also, the name Jesus in Greek is equal to 888 in Greek gematria. In getting to the Stanley Cup in 2022, the Lightning became the 3rd team to win 11 consecutive playoff games. This was the first time this occurred since the New York Islanders in '84. On the day of the Avalanche, the first black presidential candidate who ran in '84 died at the age of 84. The Lightning lost to the Avalanche, and the MVP was number 8. And the Avalanche, on the day of the death of the '80s candidate, is 8 days before the predicted avalanche in the stock market on Manhattan Island in New York. Manhattan Island in New York, as in New York Islanders. On 3/11, as in the third time to win 11 consecutive games, not done since the New York Islanders. On the date 3/11 was the COVID Black Swan event, when the COVID was officially said to be a pandemic in New York City, which was supposedly, anyway, the hardest hit city in the world with the COVID. The I-80 runs through Donner Pass, where 8 were reported death in the avalanche. This incident involving 8 deaths near the peak in which the I-80 runs through is 8 days before the predicted avalanche in the stock market after its recent all-time peak high. And again, avalanche is snow that falls from the peaks of mountains. It's all amazing. So, correction. Donner Pass is 2,160 meters above Donner Lake, not Truckee Lake. Truckee is the name of the incorporated town in which is located Donner Lake, and for that matter, Donner Pass. Truckee, California has a population of 4 times 4,000. More confirmation of everything, including the 40 months connection to the return of the 44th president as the president. The I-80 at Donner Pass was shut down indefinitely due to a winter storm at the time of the avalanche. The I-80 is a travel artery. This hints at the clogged blood arteries caused by the VACCINE. The clogged I-80 and avalanche in Truckee was 444 plus 444 plus 444 days after the avalanche won the cup, which was 129 days, as in G129, which means blood, after the climax of the trucker protest over the VACCINEs and the tabling of the Emergencies Act in the 44th Parliament. The shutdown of the I-80 and avalanche also hints at the financial markets shutting down. Because when the market loses a certain amount of percent in a day, then the automatic shutdown is triggered. In fact, we can expect that to happen on February 25th. In fact, we could even make the prediction here that this will happen. Let me just look up the percent that's required for that to happen. Yeah. There's circuit breakers for a 7% loss in a day, and then if it continues to lose for 15 minutes, trading is halted for 15 minutes. And then if it continues to decline for 13% on the day, another pause for 15 minutes. But if there's a total of 20% loss in one day, trading is halted for the remainder of the day. So we can expect a 20% loss on February 25th. That's my guess. We are expecting a black swan event. I wouldn't be surprised if it shuts down the market, though. And a reason for that is because the I-80 was shut down here 8 days before the 25th. Four guides were on a 3-day trek, and the avalanche occurred amid a winter storm that dumped 30 inches of snow that shut down the mountain pass of the I-80. This is amazing. This was the same day that 4 people died in a 30-car pileup. The snow piled up for 30 inches. 4 people died. There were 4 guides in the 30 inches of piled snow that caused an avalanche. And there were 4 deaths in the 30 cars that piled up. And it was in the mountain state, and the snow was at the mountain pass. And this was the day of the death of the 80s coach who coached the team from the mountain state. Hence the I-80 also here, connecting to the 80s coach who coached the team from the mountain state. Okay, this is amazing too. Okay, more confirmation here. Again, all of this, like I explained a second ago, hints at the 3rd term for the 44th president. The rescued skiers, well, also, 4 times 30, as in 4 people dead, 30-car pileup, as in 4 guides, 30 inches of snow. And the guides should have known about the 30 inches of snow. That's why it's relevant too. 4 times 30 is 120, which is a Noah's flood number. And this date, February 17th, that this occurred, was a Noah's flood date. 120 is the Noah's flood number because prior to the flood, God warned of a 120-year period before the flood. The rescued skiers used emergency beacons and their iPhone SOS functions to communicate with search crews. Nevada County Sheriff Captain Russell Green said, "The deceased skiers were also found with beacons," he said. Green is the 4th color of the rainbow. The 4th horse of the apocalypse that represents pestilence is green. The iPhone sent the emergency beacons near Donner Pass, those who refuse to take the mark of the Antichrist, VACCINE, in the pestilence will starve like those in the Donner Party. The enforcement of the VACCINE will be done through iPhones and smartphones that will be communicating to the authorities, if you will, just like these beacons did. And what will they be communicating? Your buying and selling and the restriction on you not being able to buy and sell food until you take the mark. But of course, Bible prophecy says that if you do take the mark, you will go to hell. But nowhere in the Bible does it say one cannot repent after having taken the mark. I say that to the majority of quote-unquote Christians that have already taken the mark. Green gives us the letter G, the 8th letter of the alphabet. There were 8 reported deaths on the day of the deaths of the 80s coach and 80s candidate, and the shutdown of the I-80. This is the 888th composite number of days before the return of the Antichrist president, who was president for 8 years and was elected in the year 08. That's right. That's the reason for the 888th composite number connection here to all of these 8s. Because Obama is an 8, because he served for 8 years and was elected in 08. The car pileup was caused by what the Colorado State Patrol called a brownout. Dirt blew onto the interstate, blocking visibility of the drivers. It was sudden and unexpected. The brownout was a black swan event in a way. 4 people died in the car crashes in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners, and this was 4 days after the Black Swan 4-time skating champion known as the Quad God, as in 4, crashed. It was an unexpected and shocking 8th place finish for the 4-time champion, and on the day of the sudden brownout crashes, the first presidential black president candidate in 84 died with skin that was brown. The candidacy of the black man with brown skin was a black swan event in American politics. The avalanche occurred at Castle Peak near Donner Pass and Frog Lake on February 17th, 2026. There are 8 confirmed deaths and 1 skier is missing for a total of 9. Prior to February 17th, it was recognized that God was pointing to February 17th with the connection of the 9th square pyramidal number of weeks. From whichever, if I recall, is 285 weeks, but the 9th square pyramidal number of weeks from the stunt that David Blaine did that was dedicated to his 9-year-old daughter, who was a big part of the YouTube special. This 9-year-old daughter at present at the stunt, which was when he lifted himself up with helium balloons into the atmosphere and then dropped from 25,000 feet. Now, Blaine is known for regurgitating frogs. This hints at the kings from around the world in the book of Revelation, chapter 4 times 4, who have been deceived by the Antichrist through the frogs that come out of his mouth. It's all allegory. But the Antichrist has frogs come out of his mouth that deceives the kings. The stunt took place in the 48th state, and there were 4 guides in the party in which 8 people were reported killed in the avalanche. It was the day of the death of the 84-year-old candidate who ran in 84. So in other words, we have this connection between Blaine's stunt in the 48th state with this 9th pyramidal connection, 9th square pyramidal number of weeks. Now, the candidate was with King Martin Luther King. The 80s candidate, the black Jesse Jackson candidate, was with Martin Luther King when he was shot on the date 4-4 in the 4 times 4th state in Little Egypt near the king's mansion, the king of rock and roll's mansion. Again, frogs come out of the mouth in the 4 times 4th chapter of Revelation. And Blaine was known for frogs coming out of his mouth. And we have the king here. And Jesse Jackson was with Martin Luther King. The reason for the 9th square pyramidal number of weeks is that Blaine's favorite magician of all time went by the nickname the Great Egyptian. And he was known for his ability to regurgitate things. In the Bible, the king of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist, and the kings of Egypt were entombed in pyramids. Hence the 9th square pyramidal number of weeks. And this was all recognized ahead of time to February 17th. And again, the 9-year-old daughter, and the king's 9-year-old daughter was flown out in Elvis's airplane on the day that he died. By the way, flown out from the 11th prime number state to join the Union, which hints at 9/11, the 9-year-old daughter from the 11th prime number state. And King Apollyon is described in Revelation 9/11. That's the reason for the king's mansion and the Martin Luther King connection here. It was also recognized prior to February 17th that this connection from Blaine's ascension, by the way, at the time of his death, Elvis the King was reading a book about the Turin Shroud with the face of the king. The title of the book was The Face of Jesus or something. But anyway, Jesus is the King of Kings. It was recognized prior to February 17th, which is why it's amazing that the king of rock and roll was reading about Jesus at the time that he died. Like literally, he died in the bathroom on the toilet, from what I understand or remember, and he was reading that book. It was also recognized prior, which by the way is another subject, but it speaks to how likely it is that Elvis came to faith before he died, which would be why he died when he died. And it was God's plan, in other words. This God's plan for many reasons, including prophecy, but he had mercy on Elvis. He waited until he came to faith. And Elvis was not doing well and needed to be with the Lord. And it was also recognized prior to February 17th that this connection from Blaine's ascension stunt, in which he fell from 25,000 feet after being lifted off the earth by helium balloons, hinted at the peak and collapse of the stock market. I mean, I recognized this before it even happened, before the stunt even happened. I knew that it would be a stock market sign. That's explained in another video. Okay, exactly the 9th pyramidal weeks later was the car crashes on the I-25. Blaine dropped from 25,000 feet in the state with four corners, which makes it a pairing of 9 and 44. And by the way, 25 is the 9th semi-prime number. I forgot to mention that. And the avalanche was hit, and the avalanche that hit the party with 4 guides, the 4th deadliest avalanche. Similar to Blaine's fall from a great height, the snow fell from a great height. Okay? The 9th pyramidal number of weeks connects the fall of Blaine to the fall of the snow from great heights. 8 deaths and 1 missing is a total of 9 skiers in California. And this was the 9th square pyramidal number of weeks after Blaine's fall from a great height that was dedicated to his 9-year-old daughter, and the king's 9-year-old daughter was flown out from California. On the day of the king's death in his mansion in Little Egypt, the king had his 9-year-old daughter, and by the way, that hints at the king of Egypt in the Bible, which is a type for the Antichrist. The king in Little Egypt died at his mansion, as in the king's palace in the book of the Bible, and he had, on the day that he died, his 9-year-old daughter flown up from California. The king's 9-year-old daughter in the 11th prime number of state, and the 9 skiers in the 11th prime number state, and also the height of the peak, Castle Peak, if you recall. Oh, I'm getting to it right here. Okay. The king hints at King Apollyon in Revelation 9:11, and the party of skiers had been staying in a hut, as in the king's mansion, at 9,110-foot Castle Peak, as in the king's mansion. Castle Peak hints at the king's mansion and castle. Amazing. The avalanche, involving 4 guides in Truckee with a population of 4 times 4,000, was the 4th deadliest in U.S. history. It occurred on the same day of a car crashes that killed 4 people in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners. The 4th deadliest avalanche in Truckee was exactly 4 years after the climax of the trucker protest sign. The 4th deadliest avalanche, involving 4 guides on the day of the crashes in the Four Corners state with 4 corners that killed 4 people in Colorado, was 444 plus 444 plus 444 days after the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup. The 4th deadliest avalanche in U.S. history, involving 4 guides on the same day that 4 people died in car crashes in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners, due to a sudden unexpected brownout, was 4 days after the sudden unexpected crash of the Black Swan skater, who goes by Quad God, and he's the 4-time U.S. champion. And again, all of this is 14 months exactly to the predicted return of the 44th president. The avalanche killed 8, and 1 is still missing, for a total of 9. It was the deadliest avalanche since 1981, when 11 people on Mount Rainier died. The date 9/17 hints at 9/11. Okay, 9 people, 11 people, Mount Rainier. Amazing. And the date itself hints at 9/11, when the 9 people died. The deadliest since the 11 in 1981. Now, the date 2/17, 2 planes 17 minutes apart of 9/11, was exactly 1,275 weeks after 9/11. Exactly. Both dates were a Tuesday. Jesus Christ is equal to 1,275 in Hebrew gematria. And this is also the equivalent to annular solar eclipse lunation. Well, that's interesting. Annular solar eclipse lunation is equal to 1,275 in gematria, and the solar eclipse on this day, February 17th, was Brown's lunation 1,275, for the purpose of pointing to 9/11 and Jesus. Also, H1275 in the Hebrew concordance is the word for berry, capital B, proper noun, pronounced Barry. Barry Obama was the 44th president. His name was Barry before he changed it to Barack as an adult. Who does that? Who changes a good American name to Barack as an adult? Someone who hates America. On 2/17, 4 guides in the avalanche, 444 plus 444 plus 144 days after the Colorado Avalanche. And on February 17th, 4 deaths in crashes in Colorado. Like I've said a few times now. But you know what's wicked? You know what's evil? What I just realized? And this is a fact, and I don't care to explain it. The prediction in this video gives me the authority to state these facts, and when I say it's a fact, it means it's a fact. Barack Obama was not the son of Barack Obama Sr. All right? But Barack Obama Sr. played the role of the father in exchange for him being allowed to stay in the U.S. to pursue his doctorate. Because Barack Obama's mother got knocked up by Frank Marshall Davis, who was the leader of the communist movement in Hawaii, and Barack Obama's grandfather was assigned to Hawaii, a CIA agent, in order to monitor the movement. At the time, the CIA had brought over students from Kenya as part of their battle against communism in Kenya, which is how Barack Obama Sr. got there in the first place. And so that's how Barack Obama's grandfather knew Barack Obama Sr. And he convinced him to play the role as the father, because had word got out that his daughter got knocked up at the age of 18 by Frank Marshall Davis, the leader of the communist movement, Barack Obama's grandfather could have lost his job. Furthermore, abortions were illegal at the time. And the irony of ironies is that the leader of the abortions party, Barack Obama, would not exist had abortions been legal in Hawaii, which incidentally and designed by God was the first state to legalize abortions. And it is the 50th state, which is why Barack Obama will become the 50th president. Anyway, that's all a fact. So what makes it even more wicked, though, is that Barry changed his name to Barack, knowing that Barack Obama was not his father. That's right. That's right. Because he had a relationship with Frank Marshall Davis in his teenage years in Hawaii. Which, by the way, is why Barack went to Chicago. Because Frank Marshall Davis was from Chicago, and so he's following in his father's footsteps. But Barack Obama's big deceit was Dreams from My Father, concocted with his partner in crime, Bill Ayers, which is where, in Bill Ayers' living room, Barack Obama launched his political career. They had schemed from the beginning to make Barack Obama the president. And they knew that an African American could never become the president, but an immigrant African could. That's why that whole thing, where Barack Obama, in the beginning especially, was continually emphasizing how he was an immigrant from Kenya, from a father from Kenya, when he knew it wasn't true. Which is why Barack Obama never paid any attention to his relatives, never helped them out when they needed help, didn't even get invited to the second inauguration and things like that. Because they weren't his blood. He was just using them. And he knew it. And by the way, the family now believes that. Like, the family believes, because the way they've been treated by Barack, that he's not their family. And that the explanation for Frank Marshall Davis is true. But what people that believe Frank Marshall Davis is the father don't understand is that he was actually born in Kenya, because they did that as a ruse, or rather a strategy to fool the immigration, which was smart, because they never spent any time together. But the excuse was that you got fed in the propagandist media. Well, it was that Barack Obama was too busy with his doctorate, which he was, but he wasn't married to the woman. He was just playing the role. But they were smart, and they went and had the kid in Kenya in order to make the marriage look real. I mean, that really does make the marriage look real, right? How can you dispute that? You can't dispute that. You have a kid, furthermore. You have a kid, and it was born in the country. I mean, that was a brilliant move. But that explains everything. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.